The city never truly slept, but there were hours when it became quieter, more honest. Late at night, when traffic slowed and shop lights went dark, the real stories of people came out. In one small, worn-out neighborhood at the edge of the city, a narrow house stood between two abandoned buildings. Its paint had faded long ago, and the windows were always shut, even during hot days. Inside that house lived a young girl who rarely spoke above a whisper, and a stepmother whose eyes were always counting something: money, favors, chances. The girl had learned early how to stay invisible. She woke up before sunrise, cleaned the floor, washed dishes, and prepared meals without being asked. School was her only escape, but even there, she stayed quiet. Teachers noticed her silence, but silence alone was not enough to raise alarms. She never complained. She had been taught that complaining only made things worse. Her stepmother had once been different. Or at least that is what neighbors said. Years ago, she had smiled more and spoken kindly. But life had squeezed her hard. Debts piled up, jobs came and went, and patience slowly disappeared. Every unpaid bill felt like an insult. Every reminder of poverty felt personal. Over time, love was replaced by bitterness, and responsibility turned into resentment. The girl became a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The stepmother spent many nights on her phone, whispering to people the girl never saw. Sometimes she laughed loudly, sometimes she argued, sometimes she stared at the screen with panic. Money was always the topic, even when no words were spoken. She believed money could fix respect, fear, and her place in the world. She just needed one big break. That break appeared in a way she'd never expected. Across the city, in a world far removed from cracked walls and cold floors, a man sat in a private room above a noisy club. He was known in the underground for being calm, sharp, and dangerous when crossed. He did not shout or threaten. His power came from decisions that were final. People feared him not because he enjoyed cruelty, but because he showed no hesitation when business demanded action. Money had never been a problem for him. Control was what mattered. Control over people, over situations, over outcomes. Yet even with all his influence, there were things he could not control. Rumors, unfinished matters from the past, and loose ends that threatened stability. One such loose end had been bothering him for months. A middleman brought him information one evening. The middleman was nervous, speaking fast, eager to impress. He talked about a troubled household, a desperate woman, and a solution that required money rather than force. The price was high, $100,000, but the middleman insisted it would solve a sensitive issue quietly. The man listened without expression. He asked simple questions. Who was involved? What was the risk? How clean was the exit? The middleman answered quickly, perhaps too quickly. The story sounded messy, but manageable. The man had dealt with worse. He did not see faces yet, only a problem and a number. When the stepmother received the message requesting a meeting, her hands shook. She reread it many times, afraid it might disappear. She knew the name mentioned, even if she had never said it out loud before. Everyone in the city knew it. Fear and excitement mixed in her chest. This was dangerous. The danger felt better than drowning slowly. The meeting was arranged in a neutral place, far from her neighborhood. She wore borrowed clothes and practiced her words in the mirror. She told herself she was doing what had to be done. Life had not been fair to her. Nobody had helped when she needed it. Now fate was offering something back. When she entered the room, she kept her head low. The man did not look threatening at first. He was quiet, well-dressed, and calm. That made him more frightening than shouting ever could. He gestured for her to sit. She spoke first. Her voice trembled, but she pushed through. She painted herself as a woman cornered by circumstances, carrying a burden she never asked for. She spoke about the girl as if she were a problem, a responsibility forced upon her. She carefully avoided words that sounded cruel, choosing instead those that sounded practical. The man listened. He noticed how she avoided eye contact when talking about the girl, but met his gaze when talking about money. He asked her one question that caught her off guard. "Is this the truth?" She swallowed and nodded. In that moment, she convinced herself it was close enough to truth to count. The deal was discussed plainly. $100,000. No drama, no future contact. The matter would be considered settled. The man made it clear that if he discovered lies later, the consequences would be severe. She agreed quickly, too quickly. When the money was transferred, the stepmother felt lightheaded. Numbers on a screen had never meant so much. In her mind, she was already planning a new life, new house, new clothes, new respect. She did not think about what she was leaving behind. She only thought about escape. Back at the narrow house, the girl sensed something had changed. The stepmother was suddenly nicer, almost cheerful. She cooked better food and spoke in a softer voice. The kindness felt strange, like a mask worn poorly. The girl stayed cautious. Experience had taught her that sudden kindness never lasted. That night, the girl lay awake, listening to the city outside. She did not know about meetings or money. She only knew that the house felt different, like the air before a storm. Across the city, the man sat alone, staring at the city lights from his window. The problem should have felt resolved. The price had been paid, yet something unsettled him. The middleman's story replayed in his mind. The stepmother's eyes replayed too. There had been fear there, yes, but also something else. Hunger. He told himself not to overthink. Business was business. Still, for the first time in a long while, sleep did not come easily, and without anyone realizing it. A decision made for control had opened a door to a truth that would refuse to stay hidden. After the money arrived, the stepmother's life changed almost overnight. The house, once cold and empty, now seemed to hum with energy, though it was false energy. She bought a few small luxuries. New curtains, a worn-out couch replaced with something softer, a few dishes and utensils she had always wanted but never could afford. She wore nicer clothes and styled her hair differently. Neighbors began to notice. Some whispered behind her back about her sudden change in fortune, and some admired her apparent good luck. It was exactly what she had hoped for: respect and a sense of power, if only superficial. Inside the house, the young girl noticed every detail. Her stepmother's sudden charm was not lost on her. She saw the careful smiles and the practiced warmth. The girl had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. She watched quietly, wary and cautious, knowing better than to trust sudden gestures of kindness. Her instincts told her that the changes were not about her comfort or happiness. They were about control and appearances. The stepmother began to talk more, but never about the past or the girl's life. Conversations focused on money, plans for future spending, and things that made her look important. She even invited a few neighbors over, showing off new items and telling stories that made her seem clever and resourceful. Yet behind her eyes, there was always a shadow of greed. The more she had, the more she wanted, and nothing was enough. Meanwhile, the young girl found herself increasingly isolated. She could no longer recognize the quiet stability she had once found in daily routines. The house felt like a stage, each person playing a part, each word chosen carefully. The girl retreated further into herself, relying on small personal rituals to feel grounded, reading quietly by the window, tending to plants, or sketching little drawings no one would see. It was a way to survive without attracting attention. At the same time, across the city, the gangster started noticing details that unsettled him. What should have been a simple transaction was starting to feel complicated. Reports from the middleman had been vague and somewhat reassuring, but something felt off. He asked for updates from other sources and began to notice inconsistencies. Stories about the household didn't match the stepmother's explanations, and small details didn't add up. His instincts, honed over years of business and danger, told him that he had been shown only part of the picture. He began to watch quietly without revealing his thoughts. It was not paranoia, but calculation. He had learned that even the smallest lie could grow into something uncontrollable if ignored. Over time, he noticed the tension in the house, the quiet girl, the stepmother's forced cheer, and the unnatural calm that seemed too perfect. He felt the presence of deception, and it made him alert. He did not yet act, but he observed carefully, knowing that the truth had a way of revealing itself when least expected. The stepmother, meanwhile, continued to enjoy her small victories. She felt clever and untouchable, believing she had used her circumstances to her advantage. She spent hours making plans, thinking of what she could buy next, and how she could ensure that the money would last or even multiply. She was unaware that her actions were being watched and analyzed, that the very person who had given her the opportunity now had doubts about her honesty and intentions. In the house, the young girl's awareness of change grew. She noticed the way the stepmother spoke differently to outsiders than she did to her. She sensed the hidden tensions and began to quietly prepare herself. She had no illusions about justice or fairness. Instead, she focused on survival, on understanding the shifts around her and finding small ways to protect herself. She observed, listened, and learned, knowing that her life depended on being careful and aware. At night, the stepmother would lie awake, thinking of her plans and dreams. She believed she had finally won, that she had climbed out of poverty, that the world would now bend in her favor. Yet even in her moments of triumph, there were cracks. She sometimes felt uneasy, though she did not understand why. Whispers of doubt crept in. Perhaps it was fear of losing what she had gained, or perhaps it was the realization that money could not solve everything. She pushed these thoughts away, focusing instead on the immediate pleasures and the power she felt over her household. The young girl, in contrast, remained cautious and silent. She had learned that patience was more powerful than fear. She quietly observed the stepmother's behaviors and the shifting dynamics within the house. Her instincts told her that the situation was fragile, that appearances could not last forever, and that truth had a way of coming out even when hidden behind walls of money and lies. The gangster, still far away, continued his quiet surveillance. He had not yet intervened, but he was preparing. His mind was calculating the risks, considering the next steps, and waiting for the moment when action would be necessary. He understood that deception and greed could have consequences far beyond what anyone anticipated. His observations confirmed that the stepmother was acting from self-interest, and that the young girl was innocent in all of it. This realization strengthened his resolve to ensure that the girl would be protected, no matter what it took. As the days passed, tension in the household became more palpable. The stepmother's confidence grew, but so did the subtle unease that she could not name. The girl remained quiet, her presence like a silent mirror, reflecting the stepmother's greed and ambitions. Every small action, every word spoken, carried weight. The house, once simply a home, had become a battleground of hidden intentions, unspoken truths, and the quiet struggle for survival. Even the neighbors began to notice that something was unusual. The stepmother appeared more powerful, more in control, yet the girl never smiled, never relaxed, never seemed to enjoy the change. Some whispered to each other that things were not as perfect as they seemed, but few dared to intervene or question directly. Life had taught them that appearances often concealed deeper truths, and that the cost of interfering could be high. The stage was set for the next phase of the story. The stepmother, intoxicated by temporary success and blinded by greed, could not see the consequences building around her. The young girl, quiet but vigilant, waited for the truth to emerge, and the gangster, calm and calculating, held the power to shift the balance. Watching as cracks began to show in the fragile facade of luxury and control, even in the silence, the story was moving forward, preparing for a revelation that would change everything in ways that no one in the house could yet imagine. The tension between appearances and reality, greed and innocence, would soon collide, and the results would be impossible to ignore. The tension in the house had grown into something heavy, almost visible. Every step, every word, every glance seemed charged with an unspoken weight. The stepmother believed that she had won, that the game she had played was complete. Yet beneath her carefully constructed facade, cracks were beginning to appear. It started with small things: a misplaced receipt, a forgotten explanation, a neighbor who asked a question that she could not answer convincingly. Each moment was a reminder that no plan is perfect and no lie can last forever. The young girl noticed these cracks too. She had spent years learning to read people, to understand the subtleties of expressions and gestures, the stepmother's forced smiles, the slight tremor in her hands. The moments when her eyes darted away, all of it told a story that words never could. The girl realized that the stepmother's control was fragile, that her confidence was built on a foundation of fear and greed, and that eventually the truth would find a way to surface across the city. The gangster began to act on the instincts that had served him so well for years. What had started as quiet observation was now turning into careful investigation. He gathered information, checked details, and compared stories. The inconsistencies that had bothered him before were becoming clearer. The stepmother had exaggerated, manipulated, and lied. The girl, it seemed, had been nothing more than an innocent caught in the crossfire of greed and desperation. The gangster did not rush. He understood the power of timing. The truth, once discovered, has a way of revealing itself in ways that cannot be ignored. He planned his next steps carefully, considering the safety of the girl above all else. He knew that acting too soon could create chaos, but waiting too long could allow the situation to spiral further out of control. Every choice carried weight, and every moment of delay was a calculated risk. Within the house, the stepmother's behavior began to shift in subtle ways. She had been careful to maintain appearances, but small pressures were beginning to show. Arguments with neighbors, mistakes in spending, and the growing awareness of those around her made her restless. She began to speak more loudly when alone, pacing the rooms and muttering under her breath. The confidence that had once seemed unshakable now felt brittle. The young girl, meanwhile, continued to observe. She did not understand all the details, but she sensed the danger and the instability around her. She had learned to protect herself, to anticipate problems before they arose. She kept her distance, stayed quiet, and looked for patterns. Her instincts told her that the situation was moving toward a revelation, one that could change everything in the household. One evening, a neighbor who had been quietly watching the household approached the girl. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing small pieces of information that had been gathered over time. The girl listened carefully, piecing together fragments of truth. She began to understand that the stepmother's sudden wealth and control were built on lies, manipulation, and deceit. The realization was unsettling, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. She knew that the facade could not hold forever, and that the truth would eventually emerge. The gangsters. Investigation brought him closer to the reality of the household. He discovered records, receipts, and messages that confirmed the stepmother's manipulation. She had crafted a story to gain sympathy, to secure the money, and to present herself as a victim. The reality, however, was starkly different. The girl had been misrepresented, used as a pawn in a game driven by greed and ambition. This realization stirred something deep within the gangster, mix of anger and resolve. He had seen injustice before, but this situation demanded more than observation. It demanded action. The stepmother, oblivious to the full extent of the investigation, continued to make plans. She spoke of investments, purchases, and social connections, all while trying to maintain control over the girl. Yet, the cracks in her story were widening. The neighbors began to notice inconsistencies. The girl's cautious observations were correct, and the gangster's quiet but calculated presence loomed closer. Each misstep, each lie, each exaggeration contributed to the collapse that was quietly forming around her. The young girl found herself caught between fear and hope. Fear of the stepmother's growing unpredictability, and hope that someone might recognize the truth and act on it. She sensed that the balance of power was shifting, that the world outside her home was beginning to acknowledge the injustices she had silently endured. Her patience, her caution, her quiet observation were preparing her for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. The gangster, now fully aware of the deception, began to prepare for intervention. His mind mapped out every scenario, every possible outcome, and every risk to the girl's safety. He understood that the stepmother's greed was dangerous, not just for her, but for anyone involved. His plan was meticulous, designed to protect the girl and to ensure that the consequences of the stepmother's actions would be unavoidable. Inside the house, tension grew, almost unbearable. The stepmother's smiles began to falter. Her speech became hurried and sometimes contradictory, and the girl's quiet confidence grew as she sensed the coming change. The household was on the brink of transformation, a shift that would reveal truths long hidden, unmask greed, and redefine the lives of those within. And then piece by piece, the evidence began to surface. Receipts, messages, and witness accounts converged, creating an undeniable picture. The stepmother's lies could no longer shield her from reality. The gangster, with precise timing, prepared to confront the situation, ensuring that the girl's safety and dignity were the priority. The moment of revelation was near, a moment that would alter lives, expose hidden motives, and bring consequences that could not be ignored. The young girl felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had endured in silence, observed in patience, and waited for the truth to surface. Now, the culmination of years of manipulation, greed, and careful planning by others was about to reach a turning point. The house, once a place of quiet control, now carried the tension of impending exposure. The dynamics within were about to change forever. As night fell, the household seemed suspended in anticipation. The stepmother, unaware of the full extent of the discovery, moved through her routine with a sense of unease she could not name. The girl, alert and ready, watched and waited. The gangster, distant but ever-present in his careful planning, held the power to act decisively. The stage was set for a confrontation with truth, a revelation that would dismantle the carefully constructed lies, and a moment that would bring justice, clarity, and change to the lives of those who had been caught in a web of greed and manipulation in that quiet, suspended space. The truth was preparing to make itself known, and when it did, nothing in the household would ever be the same again. The day the confrontation began was quiet at first, deceptively ordinary. The stepmother went about her routines as usual, preparing meals, straightening the rooms, speaking with a controlled energy that had become second nature to her. She still believed that her carefully constructed facade would hold, that her lies and manipulation would remain hidden behind the surface of wealth and influence. She could not see the threads of her deceit unraveling, nor the inevitable consequences that were drawing closer with every passing moment. The young girl, meanwhile, watched with a quiet resolve. She had spent months observing, learning, and understanding the stepmother's patterns, and she now recognized the signs that change was imminent. She knew that the balance of power in the household was about to shift, and that her survival depended on careful action and calm patience. She moved through her day with quiet attention, noting every small gesture, every hint of tension, and every slip in the stepmother's confident performance. Across the city, the gangster prepared to step into the situation. He had accumulated evidence, understood the full scope of the stepmother's manipulation, planned carefully for the moment when intervention would be necessary. His focus was not on punishment alone, but on ensuring that the girl was protected, that the lies were exposed, and that the consequences of greed and deceit could not be avoided. He was calm, precise, and ready, knowing that timing was everything. The first cracks in the stepmother's control appeared. When a neighbor confronted her with questions she could not answer, they asked about purchases, about sudden financial changes, and about inconsistencies that had been noticed over time. At first, the stepmother attempted to deflect, to answer vaguely, to maintain control of the conversation. But her responses grew hurried and contradictory. Betraying the tension that had begun to build within her, the young girl observed silently, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. The confrontation was dangerous, yes, but it was also inevitable. The truth that she had sensed, the justice that had seemed distant for so long, was finally moving into view. She remained composed, watching how the stepmother reacted, ready to respond if necessary, trusting that the outside world was beginning to recognize what she had endured. The gangster made his presence known subtly at first. He contacted local authorities and individuals with influence over the situation, providing evidence, testimony, and records that could no longer be ignored. His actions were measured, ensuring that the stepmother would have no chance to manipulate the narrative or avoid accountability. He understood that abrupt or careless intervention could endanger the girl, so he moved carefully, with a strategy that considered every possible outcome. As the investigation and confrontation progressed, the stepmother began to crumble under the pressure. Her confidence, which had seemed unshakable, faltered. She tried to justify her actions, blaming circumstances, misfortune, and the pressures of life. She claimed ignorance and desperation, attempting to explain her greed and deceit as a response to poverty and hardship. Yet her words rang hollow against the mounting evidence, and the careful observations of those who had watched her closely. The young girl felt a sense of cautious optimism. She knew that the stepmother could no longer maintain control. The web of lies was unraveling, and that the truth was now visible to those who mattered. She had endured in silence, had learned to protect herself, and had waited for this moment of revelation. Now, the consequences of greed and manipulation were becoming unavoidable. The authorities and other involved parties moved decisively. The stepmother faced questioning, scrutiny, and the realization that her actions could not be hidden. Every lie, every act of deception, and every moment of manipulation was documented and presented, leaving no room for denial. The power she had believed she held, the control she thought she possessed, was stripped away in the quiet, inevitable unfolding of truth. The gangster ensured that the young girl's well-being was the priority. Arrangements were made for her safety, stability, and future, removing her from the environment that had been shaped by fear, greed, and manipulation. The girl, once isolated and vulnerable, now found herself in a position of security, supported by those who recognized the injustice she had suffered. Her quiet endurance and careful observation had prepared her for this moment, allowing her to step into a new phase of life with hope and resilience. For the stepmother, the collapse was swift and unforgiving. Her possessions, carefully curated to display wealth and control, were no longer symbols of success, but reminders of misjudgment. Friends and neighbors who had admired or envied her distanced themselves, unable to overlook the exposure of her greed. The respect she had believed money could buy evaporated, leaving behind isolation and accountability. She faced the consequences of her decisions fully. The reality of her choices now is impossible to avoid. In the house that had once been a place of quiet tension and subtle manipulation, a profound shift had occurred. The young girl, observant and resilient, was no longer subject to the stepmother's control. The environment, once dominated by fear and greed, was now marked by truth, accountability, and the possibility of healing. The gangster, who had intervened with careful precision, observed from a distance, ensuring that justice had been served and that the girl's future was protected. The aftermath was both sobering and instructive. The stepmother's downfall illustrated the power of greed and the inevitability of consequences. The young girl's endurance demonstrated the strength of patience, observation, and quiet courage. And the gangster's involvement highlighted the importance of careful action, strategic thinking, and moral clarity in the face of injustice. As the days passed, the household began to adjust to the new reality. The young girl found a sense of stability and safety she had never known before. The stepmother, removed from her position of control, was left to confront the results of her choices and the emptiness that remained. And the gangster, satisfied that the immediate danger had been neutralized, returned to his life, changed by the knowledge that his actions had protected an innocent and exposed the corrosive effects of unchecked greed. In the quiet moments, the young girl reflected on the months of observation, endurance, and careful patience that had brought her to this point. She realized that survival had depended on understanding people, recognizing deceit, and maintaining composure in the face of fear. Now, with the stepmother's influence removed, she could begin to imagine a future where her voice mattered, her safety was assured, and her potential could grow beyond the shadows of the past. The stepmother's story served as a cautionary tale for those around her. Her fall was complete, her power gone, and the illusions of control shattered. The consequences of greed were clear, leaving a mark that could not be erased. The young girl, once silenced by circumstance, emerged with clarity, resilience, and a renewed sense of hope, ready to embrace a life defined not by fear or manipulation, but by truth, strength, and the possibilities that lay ahead. The weeks following the confrontation were a period of adjustment and quiet reflection. The household that had once been dominated by fear, manipulation, and greed was now in a state of transformation. The young girl, once silenced by circumstance, began to experience life in a way she had never known. Safety, stability, and clarity surrounded her, providing a foundation on which she could begin to build a future free from the shadows of the past. The stepmother, having faced the full consequences of her actions, was forced to confront a reality she had long ignored. Her wealth had evaporated, her respect had disappeared. The network of people she had believed would protect or admire her turned away. The illusions she had carefully maintained crumbled, revealing a stark emptiness where pride and control had once seemed permanent. Her days were now spent reflecting on choices, mistakes, and the harm she had caused. A punishment far more severe than financial loss, the young girl began to explore new routines. She spent mornings reading in quiet spaces, afternoons walking through the city with newfound freedom, and evenings reflecting on the lessons she had learned. The world that had once felt dangerous and unpredictable now presented opportunities. With support from people who had witnessed her struggles, she discovered that kindness, guidance, and care could exist beyond the confines of fear. It was a slow process, but with each day, the sense of control over her own life grew. Even the smallest moments carried meaning. The girl would tend to plants she had collected, noticing growth where there had once been only stagnation. She began journaling quietly, capturing thoughts, observations, and dreams that had been hidden away for years. Through these acts, she realized her resilience and the power of patience. She understood that while the past could not be changed, the future could be shaped by her choices, actions, and the knowledge she had gained through experience. The gangster, observing from a distance, remained satisfied that the immediate danger had passed. He continued his usual life, but with the quiet knowledge that one decision, careful, measured, and deliberate, had altered the course of an innocent life. He did not seek recognition or praise. His satisfaction came from knowing that justice, in a practical sense, had been served, and that a young girl had been spared from continued harm. The encounter had left a subtle impact on him, reinforcing the understanding that power is most meaningful when used to protect rather than exploit. The stepmother, in her isolation, slowly began to confront her own patterns. The reflection brought clarity that was painful but necessary. She began to understand the depth of her greed, the consequences of her manipulations, and the emptiness of a life built on deceit. Slowly, she attempted to reconcile with the reality of her situation, though trust and respect from others were no longer easily regained. Her story served as a warning to those who believed that wealth alone could substitute for integrity and empathy. The neighborhood, which had once whispered about sudden changes in fortune and power, now observed a different scene. The young girl, once invisible and silent, moved with quiet confidence. People began to see her not as a figure caught in a struggle, but as a person who had endured, learned, and emerged stronger. The change was subtle, but profound. Respect, unlike fear or envy, began to surround her naturally. Drawn from the acknowledgement of her resilience and patience, the house, now free from the tension of control and deceit, became a space for growth and calm. The girl rearranged the rooms, placed familiar objects where they brought comfort, and established routines that reinforced her sense of security. The walls, once heavy with unspoken fears and hidden motives, now carried the quiet energy of potential and stability. Every corner, every room, became a symbol of the journey from vulnerability to empowerment. The young girl also began to interact with others in ways she had never dared before. She joined local community programs, met new mentors, and slowly built relationships based on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. For the first time, she felt seen not as a burden or a pawn, but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. The experience had taught her to observe, understand, and act with care, and these skills now became the foundation for meaningful connections. In parallel, the gangster reflected on the broader implications of his involvement. He realized that influence, when guided by responsibility and moral clarity, could protect and restore rather than destroy. The situation had reaffirmed the importance of measured action, observation, and intervention. He continued to operate in his world, but with a subtle awareness that even a single act, when carefully considered, could shift the course of someone's life profoundly. The stepmother, now stripped of power and possessions, had limited options. Her isolation forced introspection. For the first time, she considered the human cost of her ambition, the ways her choices had hurt an innocent, and the importance of empathy and responsibility. Though it would take years for her to rebuild trust, the experience was a stark lesson in accountability and the limits of greed. The young girl, on the other hand, began to dream. She thought about education, travel, creative pursuits, and the simple joys she had missed for so long. She understood that her past had shaped her, but it did not define her. The future, though uncertain, now felt within her control. With each decision, each new day, she could continue building a life defined by her own choices rather than by the fear and manipulation that had previously dominated her existence. The neighborhood slowly adjusted to the new reality. The stepmother's absence from influence, combined with the girl's emerging confidence, shifted social dynamics. People who had once turned away from the household now saw the possibility of redemption, growth, and resilience. The story of the household, once marked by tension and deceit, became one of courage, endurance, and eventual justice. Even small victories mattered. The girls celebrated each one privately and quietly, completing a personal project, forming a genuine friendship, achieving a new understanding of herself. Each success reinforced the lesson that endurance, patience, and careful observation could lead to meaningful change. She had learned that, while the world could be harsh and unfair, it was also full of opportunities for growth, kindness, and renewal. Months later, the young girl could look back without fear. She had navigated a treacherous period of life with resilience, intelligence, and patience. The stepmother's collapse served as a constant reminder of the consequences of unchecked greed. The gangster's measured intervention had ensured safety and justice. Allowing her to step into a future that had once seemed impossible, the story concluded not with spectacle or revenge, but with quiet restoration. The young girl's life, once dominated by fear and manipulation, now held the promise of autonomy, growth, and dignity. The stepmother faced the reality of her choices, learning the limits of deception and the inevitability of accountability. And the gangster, observing from the margins, knew that his calculated decision had prevented harm and allowed truth to prevail. In the stillness of the nights that followed, the young girl slept safely, no longer haunted by the threats and manipulations of the past. Her days were filled with learning, discovery, and small joys that reinforced her resilience. She had survived not by luck, but by careful observation, patience, and quiet courage. The house, once a place of tension and fear, now carried the gentle energy of hope and possibility, a testament to endurance, justice, and the power of truth. The stepmother, left to reckon with loss and isolation, slowly came to understand that control built on greed and deception could never withstand the reality of truth. The gangster returned to his world, satisfied that his intervention had made a difference, that a young life had been spared harm, and that the quiet strength of patience and observation had ultimately prevailed. The young girl's journey, shaped by hardship and survival, now opened the door to a future defined by freedom, resilience, and the power to shape her own destiny. After the events that had changed the household so dramatically, my life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The young girl, once hidden behind fear and silence, began to experience life with a freedom she had never imagined. The lessons she had learned from observing, enduring, and surviving were now guiding her choices, giving her confidence in her ability to navigate the world. Each day felt like a new opportunity, and she embraced it with cautious hope. The neighborhood that had once whispered about the stepmother's sudden fortune now watched with quiet admiration as the young girl moved through her daily life. People noticed her attention to detail, her calm demeanor, and her quiet strength. Unlike before, when she had been overshadowed by fear and manipulation, she now drew respect naturally, not through force or wealth. But through her resilience and thoughtful presence, the stepmother, facing the consequences of her actions, was left to reflect on the choices that had brought her to isolation. The collapse of her wealth and reputation forced her to confront a life built on greed and deception. She began to understand that her desire for control and status had blinded her to the harm she caused. Every day she faced reminders of her mistakes, and slowly the weight of accountability reshaped her perspective. Though redemption would be difficult, and trust from others might never fully return, she was compelled to examine herself honestly. The young girl began creating routines that strengthened her sense of independence and self-worth. She pursued education more actively, spending hours in libraries, reading books, and developing skills she had long neglected. Each new piece of knowledge gave her confidence and a feeling of empowerment. She engaged in activities that nurtured her creativity, from drawing to writing, using them as tools to process her experiences and envision the future. She wanted to create. Her relationships with the community evolved as well. People who had once been distant or hesitant to involve themselves began to interact with her positively. Mentors, teachers, and neighbors offered guidance and support. Recognizing her intelligence, perseverance, and courage, through these connections, the girl learned the value of trust and collaboration, understanding that relying on others did not make her weak, but strengthened her ability to thrive. The gangster, observing from afar, felt a quiet satisfaction. His role in the story had been decisive, ensuring the girl's safety and exposing the stepmother's deception. Though he returned to his life in the shadows, he knew that one carefully chosen action had changed the trajectory of someone's future. The knowledge that he had helped protect innocence gave him a sense of purpose beyond his usual world of strategy, risk, and power. Even the small details of daily life took on new significance for the young girl. She tended to plants with care, noting growth and resilience in every sprout. She organized her space thoughtfully, creating an environment that reflected safety, clarity, and order. Every act, however small, reinforced her agency and her capacity to influence her own world positively. The stepmother's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale, both for herself and for those who observed her. Her experience demonstrated how unchecked greed, deceit, and manipulation can lead to rapid and irreversible consequences. The community's awareness of her story reinforced values of honesty, accountability, and empathy, highlighting that true respect cannot be bought or forced. It must be earned. The young girl also began to reflect on her own journey. She understood that survival had depended not only on observation and patience, but on the ability to remain grounded in the face of fear. She recognized that her experiences, though painful, had shaped her into someone resilient, insightful, and capable of making wise decisions. The past no longer dictated her life. Instead, it informed her choices and strengthened her resolve, as weeks turned into months. She pursued new opportunities, exploring areas of interest that had been inaccessible before. She engaged in community projects, learning to work with others toward shared goals. She attended workshops, explored creative outlets, and developed practical skills that would serve her in future endeavors. Each step reinforced her confidence, her independence, her belief in her own potential. The house itself, once heavy with tension and control, now reflected this transformation. The rooms rearranged and cared for by the girl carried an energy of stability, peace, and growth. The atmosphere was calm and nurturing, providing a safe foundation for exploration and self-discovery. In this environment, the girl flourished, learning not only to survive, but to thrive. The stepmother, observing the girl's growth from a distance, faced a mixture of emotions. There was regret for the harm caused, frustration at the consequences of her own choices, and perhaps a hint of admiration for the young girl's resilience. She began to comprehend the limitations of power obtained through fear and deceit, understanding that respect earned through manipulation is fragile and temporary. Her reflections offered lessons she could carry forward. Even if trust from others might never fully return, the young girl, growing in confidence and self-awareness, also began to understand the importance of empathy and responsibility. Her experiences had taught her the consequences of actions, the significance of integrity, and the value of patience and observation. She applied these lessons in her interactions with others, creating relationships rooted in trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Even the gangster, whose presence had once represented fear and power, now existed in the narrative as a subtle force of protection. His intervention had demonstrated that influence, when guided by responsibility and moral clarity, could prevent harm and restore balance. Though he remained in the background, his role highlighted the importance of careful, ethical action in moments of crisis. The young girl's journey also illustrated the broader impact of resilience and courage. Her story became a quiet inspiration for those around her, showing that patience, careful observation, and inner strength could overcome manipulation, greed, and fear. Her growth emphasized the power of human endurance and the potential for transformation. Even in the most challenging circumstances, as time passed, the girl continued to explore her potential. She developed plans for her future, considering education, personal growth, and meaningful contributions to her community. Each decision was informed by her experiences, guided by the lessons she had learned from survival and observation. She understood that life was a combination of opportunity, choice, and resilience, and she approached each day with mindfulness and determination. The neighborhood, once focused on gossip and speculation, now observed her with respect. People recognized the transformation, the careful navigation of adversity, and the emergence of someone who had not only survived but grown stronger through experience. The young girl's story became a testament to endurance, wisdom, and the power of integrity. The stepmother, facing the consequences of her actions, continued to reflect and adjust to her new reality. Though she faced challenges in rebuilding her life, she also gained insight into the value of honesty, empathy, and accountability. The experience, though harsh, provided lessons that could influence her future choices and behavior. The gangster, aware of the broader implications of his actions, returned to his own life with a renewed understanding of responsibility and influence. His careful intervention had altered the course of an innocent life, and he carried that awareness forward. Informed by the understanding that power, when exercised with moral clarity, can protect and restore rather than harm, in the quiet moments of the day and night, the young girl reflected on her journey. She recognized the strength it had taken to endure, the courage it had required to observe and wait, and the wisdom she had gained from navigating a complex and challenging environment. Her life, once overshadowed by fear and manipulation, now held the promise of choice, growth, and meaningful opportunity. The house, the neighborhood, and the community all reflected the changes that had taken place. What was once a site of tension, fear, and greed had become a space of potential, stability, and hope. The young girl, central to this transformation, had emerged with clarity, resilience, and a sense of agency over her own life. Her story demonstrated the enduring power of patience, observation, and careful action in the face of adversity. Ultimately, the events that had once seemed overwhelming and insurmountable became a foundation for a new beginning. The young girl's life, once constrained by fear and manipulation, now offered opportunities for growth, connection, and meaningful contribution. The lessons of the past informed her present and guided her toward a future defined by resilience, integrity, and the ability to shape her own destiny in the end. While the stepmother faced the consequences of her choices and the gangster returned to his own world, the young girl's life had truly changed. She had survived, learned, and grown, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, courage, patience, and clarity could illuminate a path toward hope, freedom, and lasting possibility.